You heard me. You're not marrying him. Those were the words my mafia boss snarled at me after months of treating me like nothing but a valued employee. I was wearing another man's ring, but Lorenzo locked his office door, his eyes black with furious jealousy. He confessed that watching another man touch me was pure hell. He risked his entire empire and stripped away all his defenses just to kiss me with 2 years of suppressed predatory need.
Turn the dial down, let the static fade, and settle in with me. You and I are going to unpack something heavy tonight. Picture the office of Lorenzo Duca. The air is thick with the scent of raw espresso and thousands of dollars of Italian leather. For 2 long years, a woman named Lily has been the ghost in his machine. She drops off his black coffee at 3 o'clock, managing his legitimate fronts while blindly ignoring the briefcase's bleeding cartel money. We see this desperate survival instinct all the time, do we not? She is inhaling the fumes of a burning room just to stay near the fire, but here is a truth you can carry with you. The toxic shadows you willingly ignore today will always grow long enough to swallow your tomorrow. She murmurs that the Romano contract needs his ink, her pulse drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs just from sharing his oxygen. Duca does not even shift his gaze. In the dim, moody light of that office, he looks less like a man and more like a myth made of violence. He wears a charcoal suit like heavy armor, radiating a quiet, brutal gravity that terrifies the streets. Even the jagged scar cutting through his eyebrow is a billboard advertising his cruelty. But to Lily, that scar is a tragic puzzle she desperately wants to solve. It by heart. It breaks my heart to say it, but here is a lesson we all learn the hard way. When we try to romanticize the shattered, dangerous edges of someone else's soul, we usually end up cutting our own hearts to ribbons. His voice is a low rumble, asking if there is anything else. The way he shapes her name is a total psychological trap. For 24 agonizing months, she maintained this flawless, professional armor while dancing around a man who hunts for a living. But on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the dam finally breaks. She breathes out a fragile yes and pushes the heavy oak door completely shut. Just like that, she locks herself inside the cage with the lion. Duca finally raises his head, those dead, winter, cold eyes pinning her trembling frame to the floor. Here is the tragic reality of human loneliness. In our absolute desperation to feel seen, we will eagerly mistake the calculating stare of a starving predator for the warm gaze of true love. He watches that heavy door click shut without a single muscle twitch. He just sits there, an absolute stone wall, asking if she brings good news or bad. Lily steps closest, the sharp click of her heels against the polished marble, echoing like a countdown to her own destruction. She whispers that it depends on his answer. Slowly, deliberately, Duca raises one eyebrow, the exact same terrifying look he gives men right before they disappear forever. In that fleeting second, Lily abandons every ounce of reason and confesses her love, handing a ruthless killer the loaded gun of her own heart. Listen closely to this, because we have all stood on this ledge. If you hand your fragile soul to someone entirely hollow, you are simply asking them to crush it. Duca turns into absolute granite. If we could freeze time and look at his face, you would see the chilling calculus of a predator assessing a sudden variable. The temperature in the room plummets. While the city pulses outside the glass, the silence inside becomes suffocating. He says her name, his voice dripping with a freezing, casual disrespect. But Lily is drowning in panic now, talking right over him, spilling how she broke the rules, how she memorized his every shadow. It is the agonizing sound of someone digging for gold in a graveyard. The hardest lesson you can ever learn is this. You have to separate the brutal, ugly truth of who someone actually is from the beautiful tragic fantasy you created in your head to survive them. 2 agonizing years of suppressed longing finally detonate across that pristine desk. Lily cries out her frantic delusion, swearing she knows what he is, what he does in the dark, and that she simply does not care. She twists his brutal cartel violence into some twisted fantasy of fierce loyalty, a textbook symptom of a deeply infected trauma bond. Slowly, Duca rises from his heavy leather chair. He moves with the fluid, terrifying grace of a tiger. He steps right into her space, bringing the intoxicating scent of expensive cologne and copper blood. He softly warns her she has no idea what she is saying. Let us look at this moment together, you and I. Sometimes the loudest warnings we ignore are spoken directly by the monster about to devour us. His baritone drops into a treacherous, vibrating frequency that promises absolutely nothing good. Lily tilts her chin upward, wearing a fragile mask of bravery while practically choking on the thick fear in her throat. She is silently begging him to deliver the final blow, to say he feels nothing at all. For just a fraction of a second, a strange flicker crosses his endless dark eyes, a ghost of human regret. If it was there, it vanishes instantly behind his iron walls. He looks right through her soul and calmly states she is merely a good secretary. It is a devastating clinical execution of her heart. Here is a truth you must protect yourself with. You can never bleed enough to make a cold-blooded ghost suddenly care about your warmth. He praises her efficiency and loyalty, remarking how tragic it would be to lose a good worker over a foolish crush. Every single word is a surgical strike designed to hollow out her self-worth. She just cracked her ribs open to hand this man her beating heart, and he is evaluating her like a defective piece of office machinery. As her tears finally spill, Duca embraces his true nature. He rips away the velvet curtain of her romantic fantasy, exposing the freezing, dead machinery of his empire. He tells her he has absolutely zero time for emotional liabilities. It is brutal, but there is a profound lesson hidden in this wreckage. Real strength is not surviving the winter of someone's cruelty. It is finding the courage to walk out into the sun. Flexing his chilling detachment, Duca essentially threatens her livelihood if she cannot bury her feelings immediately. Lily stands paralyzed, starving for a single crumb of warmth from a man who is entirely made of ice. Swallowing back a jagged sob, she nods, agreeing to finish the daily filings. As she turns away, he calls out. Her pulse skyrockets, hoping the boss has found his missing heart. But no, he just coldly commands her to keep her mind on the business. You can almost hear the wet tear of her spirit breaking. You and I know exactly how this poison works. They shatter your reality, then demand you sweep up the glass. Remember this tonight. Your inherent worth is never defined by a broken person's inability to see your actual value. She drifts back to her desk like a ghost haunting her own life, operating entirely on numb autopilot. The outer office is eerily silent, the syndicate's enforcers out handling the real dirty work in the city. Lily slumps into her chair as a wave of deep, burning humiliation fries her exhausted nerves. She spent 2 years memorizing that man's shadows, completely blind to the fact that he would never step into her light. The emotional whiplash is violently physical, tearing at her like the agonizing withdrawals of a shattered addiction. But right as she hits the absolute bottom of the barrel, her phone illuminates the dark room. Hitting rock bottom is an agonizing plunge, but it is often the exact impact you need to finally wake up and walk away. The glowing screen reveals a simple message from Lucas Morrison, a genuinely kind man who actually speaks without hidden blades in his words. He casually asks if he can take her to dinner, just aiming to make her day a little brighter. For 2 years, Lily was so suffocated by her own toxic illusions that she completely ignored the safe harbor right in front of her. But Duca's merciless rejection finally snapped her chains. Running on pure, desperate survival instinct, she quickly types a yes to Lucas. In that singular moment, she begins building the impenetrable fortress Duca demanded, but to keep him out. Here is the lesson we often forget. Saving your own life rarely looks like a semi-scene. Sometimes it just looks like building a very tall wall. Duca seals himself inside his dimly lit office for the rest of the evening, retreating into his own cold kingdom. When Lily places the syndicate's ledgers into his outbox at 6 o'clock, he treats her like thin air. She navigates down to the concrete silence of the underground garage alone, sitting in her car to grant herself exactly 5 minutes of pure grief. 5 minutes to mourn a ghost story she wrote in her own mind. Then she fixes her makeup in the mirror and drives away into the creeping night. Her armor is finally locked in place. Stick with me. You and I, because we have all worn this exact same mask. The tragedy of survival is that we too often bury our deepest wounds beneath a flawless smile instead of actually doing the work to heal. Let you and I step into this cold, heavy silence. Just picture Lily sitting alone in the dark, the quiet literally pulling the air from her lungs. Her world just collapsed. Lorenzo, the ruthless syndicate boss she handed her entire soul to, completely tossed her aside like an old receipt. On paper, moving on to a steady, safe guy like Lucas is the smartest move she could make. But inside, she is tearing herself apart. She is willingly setting her alarm to go back to that office tomorrow, ready to pour Lorenzo his espresso as if her heart is not bleeding out on his floor. Here is the midnight truth we all need to hear. A trauma bond is a perfect cage. Even when the door swings wide open, we stay shivering in the shadows because stepping into freedom on our own just feels far too terrifying. That toxic tether to the underworld just will not let her go. Her phone vibrates, casting a harsh glow across the dark room. It is a sweet, warm message from Lucas, but to her shattered nervous system, his gentle energy feels like 100-pound weight sitting on her chest. She taps the glass, typing back a polite, hollow response, desperately faking a normal life she cannot even feel anymore. For an entire week, she drifts through the mafia operations like a ghost, clocking in at 8:30, ignoring Lorenzo, and vanishing at 6. The painful lesson here is universal. We often shut down our own beating hearts just to survive the freezing orbit of a broken person, totally forgetting that simply enduring the cold is not the same thing as stepping back into the warm light. The temperature drops 10 degrees the second she walks into syndicate headquarters. Lorenzo sits behind his massive desk, totally brushing off the emotional wreckage like dust on his sleeve. The man wears a mask of pure ice, completely drained of anything human. Lily plays defense with dead silence. She stares at the floor, throwing away 2 years of intense history to act like a broken machine. Lorenzo does not blink once, but his top enforcer, Marco, is leaning in the corner, radiating this quiet predator energy. By Thursday, he sees straight through her fragile, fake armor. It is a harsh reality of human nature. The massive, bleeding wounds we so desperately try to hide from the people who broke us are usually flashing bright red to the quiet strangers watching from the back of the room. Stick with me here, because this is where the cracks really start to show. The monitor casts a harsh blue light across Lily's face, making her look entirely hollowed out. She grips the keyboard like a lifeline, refusing to look up when Marco finally corners her against the cabinet. His voice is a low rumble as he tears down her fake walls, asking where the fiery girl who used to challenge the boss disappeared to. Lily forces this incredibly painful plastic smile. She feeds him a rehearsed speech about boundaries, but her fingers are literally shaking over the keys. It is a deeply tragic thing we all do. We love to wrap our terrifying trauma in the clean clothes of a rational choice, secretly praying nobody realizes our spirit is completely collapsing right beneath the surface. Marco is reading his boss like a cheap paperback. Lorenzo might possess the razor-sharp brain of a criminal genius, but he wanders completely blind through the glass house of human emotion. His cold neglect is poisoning Lily from the inside out. The realization hits her hard. Everyone in this dark underworld sees her bleeding heart, except the exact man who crushed it. Panicking, she runs straight towards safety. Friday arrives, and she paints on a flawless fake smile, wearing soft colors to cosplay a happy life she does not possess. When Lucas hands her bright yellow flowers, the innocent gesture feels totally alien. It is a tough pill to swallow. Sometimes we run so fast toward a safe harbor, only to realize our tired eyes are already perfectly adjusted to the pitch black. Lily stares into her reflection, doing heavy, emotional construction work on her shattered vibe. She steps into tall heels to force her shoulders back, fixing her hair to completely bury any trace of the weak girl who fetches Lorenzo his coffee. Taking those flowers from Lucas, she forces herself to breathe in that ordinary scent. Lucas is the absolute opposite of the mob boss. He is a genuinely honest guy making clean money miles away from the syndicate blood and smoke. He actually looks at her like a real human being, not a disposable asset. Here is the brutal truth about carrying a damaged soul. When you spend years surviving inside a literal blender of emotional manipulation, a gentle breeze of normal kindness feels like a forgotten language you completely lost the ability to speak. The smooth jazz instantly turns into deafening static the second Lucas asks the wrong question. He casually brings up Lorenzo, and Lily completely freezes like a deer in headlights. Acting exactly like a prisoner, protecting her warden, she lies, painting this ruthless mafia don as just a strict but fair boss. Lucas leans across the table, squinting, because he can literally sense the massive ghost sitting right there with them. He asks why she pushed him away for so long. Lily feeds him some weak excuse about simply being confused. Listen, the ugly truth is our bruised pride makes us lie to protect our own toxic chains. It is far easier to tell the world your heart is just confused than to admit you willingly threw it straight into a blazing fire. You and I must look closely at what happens next. Lucas grabs her hand and straight up promises her a solid future. For any normal person, this is the ultimate jackpot. But behind Lily's painted smile, red alarms are absolutely screaming in her mind. Her breathing drops. She feels like a trapped animal backed against a wall. Lorenzo's mind games have completely ruined her internal wiring, leaving her addicted to the toxic crumbs of his attention. Her logical brain screams to jump onto this safe lifeboat, but her broken spirit actually misses the dark, drowning feeling of the mob boss. She smiles and says, yes, hiding the panic. We constantly mistake true peace for total boredom, especially when our exhausted souls are trained to believe absolute chaos is true love. She keeps pushing through the hollow motions, desperately praying that faking it will eventually make it real. Standing under the porch light, Lucas leans in for a super gentle kiss. His eyes are literally asking for permission, patiently waiting for a yes, Because it is so respectful and sweet, she feels absolutely nothing. Zero sparks. Her damaged brain is completely starved for the toxic fire Lorenzo trained her to crave. Weeks blur into this endless loop of nice dinners and safe dates. When Lucas asks to make it official after 3 weeks, she just caves. She grabs his hand entirely as a survival move, not out of passion. There is a deeply tragic reality in chaining yourself to a safe, quiet dock just because you are completely terrified of the dark water. Lily is using this normal guy as a human shield against the mental destruction of her mafia boss. Lucas is just a blank canvas for her escape. But back at the syndicate, the wolves never stop watching. Marco spots her shifted energy in a second. He traps her by the printer, demanding to know if Lorenzo knows about her new boyfriend. Not a chance. Lily snaps back instantly, using explosive rage to hide how hard her heart is panicking. She aggressively defends her secret, screaming that her personal life is none of the boss's business. But her fierce reaction totally exposes her. True healing is actually just quiet indifference. When you react to a basic question with pure, shaking rage, it proves your darkest chains are not broken at all. They are simply hiding out of sight. We are about to uncover what happens when the past catches up. Lily lives in deep denial, aggressively acting like she escaped the boss's toxic grip. Marco just stares at her, exhausted by her lies. He quietly tells her she deserves real love, not to remain a ghost haunting their dark empire. Then, 6 weeks into this fake escape, Lucas decides to go all in. Sitting under the warm restaurant lights, he slides a velvet box across the table and reveals a massive diamond. For Lily, all the oxygen is instantly sucked right out of the room. This is not a romantic win. It is a violent crash between her faked life and the absolute trauma she keeps burying. Sometimes the shiny life preserver we desperately grab becomes the exact heavy stone that drags us straight to the bottom. That flawless diamond is basically throwing daggers of light right into her eyes. Lucas starts dropping incredibly romantic lines, praising her mind and offering to build a completely safe life together. It is everything a healed person could want. But I want you to look closely at her face right now. Her eyes are totally dead. She completely dissociates, floating like a ghost above her own frozen body while this life event happens without her. Deep down in her wrecked mind, she is not walking toward the sunshine. She is secretly praying for Lorenzo to kick the restaurant door off its hinges and drag her back into the toxic chaos. The ultimate tragedy of being broken is exactly this. A deeply damaged soul will stare directly at a sturdy rescue boat and willingly choose to drown in the storm. Listen closely to this, because you and I both know how this tragedy starts. Lily says yes to Lucas, but her soul is entirely somewhere else. The crowd is raising their glasses, cheering for love, while she stands there hollow. That brilliant diamond sits on her finger, heavy as a stone, doing absolutely nothing to cover the invisible scars Lorenzo carved into her heart. Come Monday morning, she walks straight into the lion's den. She steps into the boss's office, flashing that ring like a shield. She tells herself it proves she survived him. But here is a quiet truth we all eventually learn. When you parade your shiny new happiness just to make a toxic ghost jealous, you are only proving that they still hold the keys to your mind. Meanwhile, the syndicate operates with a brutal, freezing precision. Lorenzo sits enthroned like the absolute king of the underworld, ruling his shadows while Lily tries desperately to pretend that Diamond is not burning a hole in her hand. The air in the room instantly grows heavy. The moment I up for his espressos, he rolls up his sleeves, Moving with the quiet grace of an apex predator, Lily slides the porcelain cup across his mahogany desk, totally robotic. And then it happens. His bare knuckles graze her skin. A violent electric shock travels straight up her arm, instantly reducing weeks of hard healing to ashes. You can build the thickest walls to protect your heart, but when the one who shattered you reaches out, your body remembers who its master is. The oxygen simply vanishes from the cold air. Lorenzo drops his gaze to that sparkling diamond, staring dead at the fragile little fence. Another man tried to build around his possession. For one terrifying heartbeat, his untouchable, kingpin armor fractures completely. A flash of pure, unhinged territorial fury burns in his dark eyes before he forces it down behind a chillingly calm mask. Lily attempts to hold her ground, lifting her new fiancé's name like a paper shield. It is a fatal error. Lorenzo spits Lucas's name back like it is dirt on his shoes, his mind already calculating the debt of her absence. It is a harsh reality. When the devil discovers his favorite captive has found a window, he does not just lock it, he burns the entire escape route to ash. Stick with me here, because you and I are watching a pure masterclass in tension. The suffocating weight in the office spikes when Lily delivers that classic, naive line, "When you know, you know." A microscopic twitch ripples across Lorenzo's jaw, and his polished exterior completely crumbles. He offers a hollow word of congratulations, but his eyes tell a different story. It is the gaze of a starving wolf, denied its prey. Believing she has won, she turns her back toward the heavy oak door. Then his voice strikes like a whip in the dark. Gripping the desk until his knuckles turn bone white, he delivers his ultimate command. Take it off. If someone treats your fragile soul like their personal property, they will never simply open the cage and let you fly away. The temperature in the massive room plunges below freezing as he refuses to back down. He wants that diamond gone. Watch how effortlessly he abandons the desk, crossing the floor to completely shatter her personal boundaries. Lily stumbles backward, her nervous system screaming alarms of impending danger. She desperately tries to call out his madness, but a man fueled by pure, terrifying arrogance does not see a boundary, he sees a challenge. He steps entirely into her shadow, his voice a smooth whisper as he claims her future belongs solely to him. His heavy hand snaps up, gripping her jaw and forcing her terrified eyes to meet his. When a predator steps into your breathing space, it is never an act of love. It is the terrifying execution of absolute control. He repeats the dark demand, drawing out every single syllable of her name like a judge passing an inescapable sentence. Behind her panicked eyes, Lily is completely spiraling. Only 6 weeks ago, this man shattered her worth, looking right through her as if she were dust on his tailored suit. Now he stands here, claiming the rights to her destiny. Desperate for a foothold, she fires back, hurling the memory of his brutal rejection straight at his chest. But his arrogant response cuts deeper than a knife. "I know what I said." The sheer audacity of his words stops her heart. Her frozen panic boils over into trembling, magnificent rage. Righteous anger is often the last shield our minds can raise against a master manipulator. You and I have to look closely at this exact pivot, because Lily finally recognizes the massive red flags waving in the dark. This is no fairy tale. This is a hostile, calculated takeover. Lorenzo stands completely still, swearing his dark devotion never wavered. Then comes the masterstroke. He steps back just far enough to slide the heavy brass deadbolt into place. The trap shuts. He begins weaving an absolute masterclass in deception, claiming he only broke her heart to shield her from his violent underworld. He twists the narrative so deeply that he blames her new engagement on his own tragic sacrifice. It leaves us with a chilling realization. A deeply toxic soul will always find a way to dress up their unhinged, dangerous jealousy in the shining armor of a noble knight. Despite the violent trembling in her hands, Lily fights desperately to hold the line. She tells him plainly that she chose a quiet, normal life for a reason. That is exactly when Lorenzo unleashes his ultimate weapon. He plays the bleeding victim. He confesses to spending 2 agonizing years tracking her every movement, twisting his obsessive stalking into a tragic tale of romantic suffering. Lily attempts to fight back with reason, calling out the massive, terrifying holes in his logic. But as he steps deeper into the dim, heavy light of the room, her logic completely shatters. The freeze response takes total command. He leans in close, wrapping her in a thick blanket of fear. The most dangerous bonds begin the moment a captor convinces you that they are your only safe harbor. He is delivering a flawless performance, playing the role of a broken martyr who suffered in silence just to keep his love alive. But Lily refuses to surrender quietly. With hot tears streaming down her pale cheeks, she reminds him of the brutal, humiliating way he discarded her. She demands to know if she is supposed to just erase her own memory and fall to her knees. Her resistance is like a tiny, flickering match in a pitch-dark room. Lorenzo does not raise his voice by a single decibel. Instead, his heavy hands cup her face with a terrifying, tender gentleness. Then he whispers the ugly truth. He simply could not stomach the thought of another man touching her. A man obsessed with power does not mourn the loss of a soulmate. He rages over losing his favorite prize. Now, you and I are witnessing the exact second the emotional venom reaches her heart. He whispers that breathing without her is tearing him apart, and that perfectly timed fracture in his armor completely decimates her final wall. Dropping her voice to a broken whisper, she admits how utterly worthless he made her feel. He does not offer a single word of denial. He simply presses his forehead against hers, catching a falling tear with his thumb, swearing he will spend his life fixing the damage. But the underworld king always extracts a price. In the same breath, he orders her to throw the diamond away. It is a haunting truth. The very people who break you into pieces will always try to sell themselves as the only medicine for your bleeding wounds. She takes one final, desperate swing at survival, reminding him that she is nothing more than an employee on his payroll. Lorenzo obliterates that boundary instantly, pulling her violently against his chest. Pay attention to how deep the manipulation goes here. He entirely flips the board. Dropping the calculating mafia persona, he morphs into a desperate lover, swearing he would let his entire criminal empire burn to the ground just to keep her. The sheer gravity of that confession is wildly intoxicating. In the suffocating quiet of the office, her breath hitches as the steel jaws of the trap finally lock shut. His shadow swallows her whole. When a dangerous man repatches his dark obsession as an epic romance, the victim will almost always mistake their new cage for a sanctuary. The impossible ultimatum hangs like a blade in the silent room. The price of surrendering to him is setting a match to her peaceful, ordinary life. If you checked her pulse in this moment, she is flatlining in sheer panic. Deep down in her bones, she knows Lucas represents daylight, quiet, steady, and completely free of this heavy darkness. But trapped in the suffocating gravity of Lorenzo's office, his magnetic pull is far too massive to escape. She makes the tragic error of confusing a massive spike of raw survival adrenaline for a once-in-a-lifetime cosmic connection. Chasing that toxic, brilliant high, she finally closes her eyes and surrenders. We will absolutely burn down a quiet, peaceful life if the impending disaster feels beautifully cinematic enough. Let us dim the lights and really look at this broken picture tonight. Lily stands there, tears staining her cheeks, trying to negotiate with a man who is essentially a walking shadow. She begs for a seat at his table, a tiny shred of free will in his violent syndicate. Lorenzo does not even blink. He tosses her empty vows like pennies into a wishing well, demanding absolute devotion while offering nothing real in return. She searches his dark eyes, pleading with him to prove this is not just a cruel game of control, but his cold stare gives her the only answer she needs. Here is a truth for the midnight hour. You can never force a power-hungry soul to give you honesty. They will simply hold up a mirror to your deepest desperation, feeding you the exact lie you need to hear until you gladly hand over the last piece of your soul. Just look at the tragic gravity pulling these two together. She stares up at him, practically begging for the power to ruin him just as completely as he could ruin her. What we are seeing is the heavy, suffocating peak of a trauma bond. Two shattered people trying to find balance in total destruction. Watch how effortlessly Lorenzo shifts his mask. His hard face softens as he whispers that she has held a blade to his throat since the day they met. It is brilliant and cruel. He takes his own dark obsession and spins it into a fake display of vulnerability. Then comes the trap, daring her to be brave enough to stay. It brings us to a chilling lesson. If a smooth talker can convince you that locking yourself in a cage is an act of courage, you will not just walk inside. You will turn the key yourself and call it love. You and I are going to sit in the dark and unpack this moment together because it is heavy. The scene holds its breath as Lily stares at the blood staining his hands, entirely aware of the violent underworld waiting to swallow her whole. But reason is gone now, drowned out by the wild, deafening beat of her obsession. With hands that cannot stop shaking, she slides that simple, safe diamond ring right off her finger. The tiny sound of metal hitting the solid wood desk drops like a final verdict. It is the sound of absolute surrender to a king of shadows. He steps closer, pulling her into the dark to claim his hard-won prize. It leaves us with a bitter truth to swallow, trading a quiet, predictable life for the rush of toxic chaos never brings you peace. It only forces you to learn a far deadlier game just to survive the morning. The air in that room grows so thick you could cut it with a knife. Lorenzo traps Lily against the heavy oak door, his fingers tangling roughly into her hair, severing any lingering thought of escape. Make no mistake, this is not a sweeping romance. This is a predator claiming his territory. The low light catches a dangerous, thrilling darkness in his gaze as he quietly demands she admit she belongs to him. She breathes out her surrender, and tragically confusing the death of her own freedom with a grand, romantic victory. She begs him to let his walls crumble, and he lies without a second thought, whispering that he already has. There is a harsh lesson hiding in this shadow. We so often mistake the very cages built to break us for the safe shelter we have always craved. Do not let a warden convince you to fall in love with your own chains. 3 sharp knocks suddenly rip through the heavy quiet of the room. A muffled voice bleeds through the wood, bringing an urgent call from the syndicate. The violent reality of his criminal empire comes crashing right back down, but the crime boss does not move an inch. His dark eyes remain entirely consumed by Lily. He actually runs his deadly family through a cracked door, keeping his newly won prize pinned under his stare. Without blinking, he coldly orders her to cut all ties to her normal world and abandon her fiancé immediately. We watch the very last flicker of her conscience fade to black as she lets out a shaky breath. It is a wild but deeply true lesson for us. Once a truly toxic connection takes root in your soul, you will willingly strike the match and burn down your safest shelters just to keep the destructive fire burning. A heavy shadow falls across Lily's face as the crushing weight of what she is doing finally hits her. You can see her desperately wanting to look the innocent man she is leaving in the eye, to end things with just a scrap of grace. But watch Lorenzo right here. The muscle in his jaw jumps, a sudden flash of raw, unfiltered mob dominance. He flatly refuses to let her handle this alone. He is not being a sweet protector. He is parading his newly captured prize to completely crush a defeated rival. She hears that dark, territorial grit in his voice. To anyone thinking clearly, that possessive growl is a blaring siren telling you to run for your life. But her broken heart just drinks it in. The lesson here is a painful one. When we are starving for worth, we will tragically confuse a monster's jealous control with real unconditional love. Let us slow down and really take in this exact frame together, because it is haunting. Lily's voice trembles as she whispers just how cruel this whole thing feels. The camera pushes in on Lorenzo's eyes, and there is nothing but ice. Basic human empathy simply does not exist in his world. He tells her he does not care, his voice dropping to a lethal, bone-chilling pitch at the mere thought of her with another man. In his mind, she is not a person making a choice. She is a stolen possession he is taking back. He leans in close, making a dark promise that no one else will ever touch what is his. Any normal survival instinct would scream at you to run away. Yet, she just stands there, letting his shadow swallow her completely. The lesson, sometimes the pull of a dark soul is so heavy, it totally overrides your basic instinct to survive. The silence in that office stretches out, growing so thick it is hard to even breathe. After feeling invisible for so long, the intense, heavy weight of his attention hits Lily straight in the veins like a dangerous drug. It terrifies her down to her bones, yet she leans her face right back into the flame. Desperate for just a fraction of solid ground, she begs him to promise he will always be honest. He swears to it without a single blink, murmuring that no other woman has existed in his mind since the second he saw her. That chilling confession washes over her, filling her chest with a deeply manufactured warmth. He has perfectly become both the fatal poisons and her only cure. It is a sobering truth for the late hours. When you are truly starving to be seen, even a single drop of deadly poison will taste like the sweetest glass of water. The emotional tension is absolutely redlining here. Lily's voice breaks in the dark as she reminds him of the wreckage she caused, calling him her literal damnation. Lorenzo simply pulls her hard against his chest. His grip tightens until her breathing stops, leaving a heavy, physical reminder of his absolute authority. Suddenly, a phone vibrates on the desk. Watch how the energy in the room instantly turns freezing cold. He adjusts his tie, snapping right back into the ruthless boss of a violent empire. Then, he drops the final lock into place. He casually mentions that she will never be returning to her old apartment. He flashes a dark smile, dressing up this forced isolation as a noble act of protection. It is a painful lesson to learn. The massive walls built to keep dangerous threats out are almost always the exact same walls used to lock you inside. This man is playing a master game of chess while she is completely lost on the board. He dictates every single term of her new reality, moving so relentlessly fast that she cannot find a quiet second to think. He commands her to leave the old ring behind and change her clothes. methodically wiping away the independent life she built from scratch. To anyone watching, this total erasure of a person is a glaring warning sign. But as the camera pushes in, we see something tragic. She actually smiles. She nods, blindly accepting his strict rules for how she is allowed to exist now. Her mind is completely scrambled by the sudden freefall into submission. It is a quiet tragedy we see entirely too often. We will gladly hand over our own freedom as long as we believe the villain taking it is the only person who truly understands our hidden pain. Stay with me on this one, because this visual detail is everything. That diamond ring sits abandoned right next to her keyboard. It rests there in the shadows as a tiny, sad monument to the safe life she is happily throwing into the fire. Yet, as Lily stares down at it, she only feels a hollow, sickening sense of relief. She feeds herself the lie that this brutal betrayal is actually an act of mercy for the man she is leaving. Suddenly, her screen lights up with a cold message from Lorenzo. They are buying a new ring today. It is not jewelry. It is a heavy collar. She types back a weak question, asking why they need to rush. But her hesitation is completely fake, just a ghost of the independent girl she used to be. The hardest truth about falling into the dark is this: by the time you finally pause to ask if you are moving too fast, you are already gone. His reply flashes across the glowing screen, brutally cold and entirely stripped of any soft romance. He types flatly that he is putting his ring on her finger today, long before she ever gets a chance to change her mind. It is a terrifying, open admission of the steel trap he has locked around her. Lily reads the glowing words, fully aware that this man is a deadly cliff edge. Yet, buzzing from the dark thrill of his absolute control, she closes her eyes and steps off into the void anyway. She desperately tricks her own heart into believing this chaotic freefall is just deep passion. Outside her door, the heavy, violent sounds of his syndicate echo down the hall. Life is full of these quiet, haunting moments right before the crash. They leave us with a harsh truth. Our most destructive choices are rarely blind mistakes. They are tragedies we walk into with open eyes. Picture Lily in the suffocating silence of her office, hands trembling as she realizes she is about to dismantle the life of her innocent fiancé. The heavy door swings open, pulling the oxygen from the room. Lorenzo steps in. He is the undisputed king of the underworld, radiating a quiet, brutal intimidation. But the moment his eyes find hers, the ruthless mobster vanishes. He reaches out, and her shaking fingers trace the jagged scars across his knuckles, the very hands that built a criminal empire in cold blood. You and I need to understand something vital. A monster who knows how to shed a vulnerable tear on command is infinitely more terrifying than a villain who just bares his teeth. True danger rarely shouts. It approaches you softly, wearing a gentle disguise. The second his scarred skin grazes hers, adrenaline floods her veins, permanently locking in her tragic fate. Marco saunters into the dimly lit room, flashing a cynical smirk as if this twisted dynamic is an ordinary evening. Without missing a beat, the men pivot from dark romance to calmly discussing an enemy syndicate they just buried. Meanwhile, Lorenzo lazily traces circles on her hand, holding her like a prized possession. But Marco delivers a freezing dose of reality. By standing beside the city's most ruthless boss, Lily just painted a massive target squarely on her own back. It is a harsh, heavy truth about chasing power. A golden crown might look incredibly beautiful under the spotlight, but it only ever makes you the absolute easiest mark when the pitch dark finally settles in. In a flash, the quiet life she knew is completely vaporized. Lorenzo suffocates her existence, surrounding her with a shadow team of armed enforcers. Her freedom is swallowed whole by his crippling paranoia, yet tragically, she looks up at his cold face and mistakes this terrifying captivity for passionate romance. She begs him to at least let her warn poor Lucas before breaking his heart, but Lorenzo's eyes go utterly dead. He refuses, admitting he wants a front row seat to watch an innocent man mentally snap, twisting his cruelty into a sick declaration of love. Let this be a heavy warning for us all. Genuine affection is meant to build a safe shelter for your soul, but a dark, toxic obsession will only ever find satisfaction when it claims the smoldering ashes of your total ruin. You and I have watched this exact brand of disaster unfold before, haven't we? It always begins in the shadows of an inescapable trap. He backs her against the freezing concrete wall of a dimly lit garage, his voice dripping with deep entitlement. In his twisted reality, she never chose her fiancé. To him, Lucas is just a thief who took property belonging to the Don. He flexes his dark dominance, bragging about breaking rivals just for the rush. When his hands grab her, there is zero warmth. It is just a ruthless kingpin stamping his signature onto his prize. Look at her shaking hands. It is a bitter, agonizing lesson, but toxic control constantly disguises itself as grand, sweeping passion, right up until the exact moment the heavy steel cage permanently locks around your soul. The suffocating tension skyrockets as they slide into the heavy leather of his car. He shuts her door with a hyper-rehearsed smoothness, masking the freezing ice beneath his charm. As the streetlights flash across their faces, his hand stays firmly glued to her trembling leg. It is a silent, terrifying reminder that she has nowhere left to run. She catches a flash of deep guilt, realizing she is about to destroy an innocent man. But Lorenzo is a mastermind at psychological warfare. He smoothly flips the script, convincing her that crushing a good soul is just the unavoidable tax on their twisted destiny. We constantly accept the comfortable lies of dangerous people simply because facing the brutal reality of the pain we cause is a heavy burden our fragile hearts refuse to carry. Listen to the heartbreaking madness, she whispers as they cruise through the empty city. He coldly orders her to declare that she belongs to him, desperate for the twisted thrill of her verbal surrender. Tragically, she just folds. She confuses her own mental breakdown for a profound romantic awakening. Her voice is entirely hollow as she calls this dangerous criminal her center of gravity, as if he is a natural force she cannot escape. She promises to walk straight into a burning fire as long as he holds the match. It is agonizing to watch her throw her self-worth away. Here is the saddest truth hidden in this dark story. When you chain your survival to the approval of someone who constantly breaks you, you never actually find real love. You just slowly and quietly erase yourself entirely. He presses his lips to her shaking fingers, and for one chilling second, the fake boyfriend mask falls away. He lays out the horrifying truth right there in the shadows. He coldly confesses that his obsession was never an innocent crush. It was the calculated patience of a predator stalking his prey. He brags about methodically tearing her mental defenses apart. He looks her dead in the eyes and admits he is a monster who doesn't deserve her. But he is greedy enough to drag her to hell anyway. He guarantees her a miserable future, fully knowing her mind is too broken to run. Please, burn this heavy lesson into your memory. Sometimes the most dangerous people do not bother lying to us. They look us in the eye, tell us exactly how deeply they will ruin us, and we simply refuse to listen. We need to unpack this next move, because this is where her sanity flatlines. She sits frozen, telling this lethal mobster to stop fighting his feelings, believing she runs the show. But watch the genius of these dark villain tactics. They pull up to Lucas's quiet house. Lorenzo cuts the engine and hands her a fake golden ticket, whispering that she is free to handle this alone. A kingpin never leaves anything to chance. He has hacked her fragile brain so deeply that she is terrified of her own shadow. Right on cue, she begs her captor to hold her hand. True. Hardcore psychological manipulation doesn't sound like a boss shouting aggressive orders. It looks exactly like someone politely handing you the heavy key so you can willingly lock yourself inside a dark cage. The darkest, victorious smirk slowly crawls across Lorenzo's face. That isn't a man falling in love. That is a ruthless warlord planting his flag on a conquered city. He walks her to the door, his heavy hand glued firmly to her spine. It mimics protection, but it is absolute ownership. The door swings open, and Lucas stands there, his face lighting up with pure, innocent energy. Watch his soul leave his body the second he spots the terrifying syndicate boss, looming like a shadow right behind his fiancée. Lily can barely choke out her words to ask if they can come inside. Human intuition is an incredible defense mechanism. Long before anyone speaks a single syllable, your nervous system will always scream a frantic warning when a literal monster is standing right on your porch. Look at the heartbreaking contrast inside this living room. Lucas built a cozy, brightly lit sanctuary, but Lily's corrupted brain now sees this beautiful piece as disgusting. Lucas stares at them, choking on raw shock as he recognizes the ruthless underworld boss. Lorenzo stands there like a towering shadow, poisoning the warm vibe of the house just by existing. He doesn't blink as he coldly announces that Lily has some news to drop. She shoots him a desperate look, silently begging him to make it easier, but he just watches her struggle. He intentionally forces her to swing the heavy axe herself. Listen closely to this lesson. You must always watch out for the dark manipulator who actively demands you completely burn down your own peaceful life just to prove your blind loyalty to them. Lucas stumbles backward, his face twisting in raw agony. He frantically asks what he did wrong, trying to stop his universe from imploding. Lily whispers that he was perfect, which just grabs the knife in his chest and twists it deeper. Watch her eyes. She actually checks in with Lorenzo, waiting for his sick nod of approval before completely annihilating Lucas. She drops the heavy bomb that their future was a total lie. Lucas snaps. He stares at the dead-eyed mafia boss ruining his life and explodes into blind rage, screaming at Lorenzo's arrogant smirk. Lorenzo doesn't even flinch. He calmly states that he owns her now. Here is a brutal, crushing life lesson. You cannot ever negotiate with a cold villain who views human beings as nothing more than pieces of acquired property. Let's look at this together. This is a masterclass in emotional destruction. Lorenzo's steps forward, wiping out Lucas's future like brushing away a fly. Lucas tries to fight back, crying about the months they spent building a life. But it is hopeless. He is a regular guy facing a terrifying final boss. Lorenzo's heavy frame blocks out the light. He drops the ultimate nuke, telling Lucas that every smile Lily gave him was just a fake survival tactic. He doesn't just steal the girl. He completely poisons every good memory Lucas had. The heartbreaking twist? Lily actually nods along with him. Here is the tragic reality you must remember. When a toxic lie is hammered into a broken mind long enough, it simply becomes the absolute truth. That trauma bond is sealed forever. You and I are going to unpack a heartbreak so deep it leaves a permanent mark. Lily stands shivering, forcing out the lie that her heart belongs to someone else. It is the tragic script of a completely hijacked mind. Lucas stares at the silver ring trembling in her palm, realizing his peaceful future is gone. His voice is a broken rasp as he tells her to keep it, trash it, or just burn it. The man is in such agony he can barely point to the exit. For one fragile second the guilt hits Lily, but Lorenzo is already there. He slides a heavy hand down her spine, steering her away before an apology can form. We must learn from this. You can never use an innocent soul to hide from your demons. The darkness always finds you, leaving only the innocent bleeding in the quiet of the night. The door clicks shut, and the adrenaline instantly evaporates. Lily slumps against the peeling wallpaper, begging Lorenzo to reassure her she is not a monster. And what does he do? He pulls her close, playing the ultimate savior in a tragedy he personally directed. His voice is flat as he brushes off Lucas, claiming the man will just bounce back. He shows zero remorse. Instead, Lorenzo spins a dizzying web of manipulation, acting as if he is the true victim who suffered by watching another man touch his property. It is a suffocating display of dominance. This brings us to a bitter truth about toxic control. The darkest hearts will deliberately burn your home straight to the ground, only to turn around and demand that you thank them for the warmth of the falling ashes. Lily gazes up at the shadow of the man who just destroyed her world. Her voice shakes as she asks, what happens now? Lorenzo gives her a slow, terrifying smile that belongs to a predator. It is a glaring warning sign, but her broken spirit ignores the alarm. Leaning in close, his voice smooth as glass, he maps out the rest of her existence. He will buy a heavy diamond to mark his territory, then take her home to seal their fate. The knot in her stomach is pure terror, yet her hijacked mind translates that panic into twisted desire. She weakly calls him arrogant. He laughs, calling it the brutal truth. Never forget this painful lesson. Once you give up and stop fighting to be heard, the suffocating silence closing in on you will eventually start to feel exactly like peace. Stay with me on this one, because the psychology here takes a very dark turn. We are witnessing the exact second the final wall around her soul shatters. Wrapped inside his crushing embrace, she registers his threatening presence and mistakes it for absolute safety. Her surrender is total. He kisses her, but make no mistake, this is purely a possessive brand of ownership. He guides her down a hidden street to a private jeweler. They step through massive steel doors into a hushed velvet room, severing her from the outside world. This is how the trap finally snaps shut, locking her in profound isolation masked by staggering wealth. The timeless lesson here is written in stone. A gilded cage is always a prison, no matter how many heavy diamonds they scatter across the floor. The air in this private viewing room is heavy and suffocating. The jeweler bows his head with the trembling fear reserved only for an apex predator. Pay attention to Lorenzo. He is not holding Lily, he is caging her. His arm is a calculated vise, pinning her against his dark suit. When he demands to see the rings, he is not searching for a romantic token. He is shopping for a permanent brand. He whispers that price is irrelevant. Lily sinks into the velvet sofa, realizing a single stone here could fund her entire life. She attempts a fragile protest, but Lorenzo waves it away without a second thought. There is a deeply unsettling lesson hidden in this quiet room. When a controlling figure freely buys your reality, they are silently purchasing your absolute, unquestioning compliance. Every move this man makes is chillingly calculated. Lorenzo rubs his thumb over her bare ring finger, using that slow friction to anchor her terrified focus entirely on him. There is no classic proposal here. He does not ask For her future, he simply dictates her surrender. He demands a diamond heavy enough to broadcast his claim to the underworld. A desperate flicker of reality hits Lily, and she whispers that they never even discussed marriage. She is right. He announced it like an incoming storm. To a master manipulator, consent is never a question. It is an assumed fact. He chuckles at the thought of a normal courtship. Hold on to this vital lesson tonight. True partnership relies on a freely shared voice. Never a unilateral mandate hiding behind the mask of dark romance. To tighten the psychological noose, Lorenzo drops his voice into a velvet whisper and recites her private morning routines. By dressing his obsession in the comforting rhythm of devotion, he expertly melts down her final walls. It is a horrifying display of affection forged into an iron chain. Giovanni returns, shattering the dark spell. The nervous jeweler suggests as a rare sapphire, but Lorenzo locks his cold eyes onto a massive, brutal emerald. Lily shakes her head, trembling as she whispers that a stone of that size makes a normal life impossible. Lorenzo just smiles, catching the dim light like a wolf in the shadows. The lesson here is something we must never ignore. Gravant, sweeping gestures are very often engineered for one specific reason: to permanently blind your rational intuition. The air turns cold as Lorenzo dismisses her logic, telling her to stop thinking like an employee. He takes the heavy emerald and slides it onto her shaking finger. A jagged breath escapes Lily. She feels the weight of the metal, acting as an anchor, binding her to his world. She stares at the brilliant green fire flashing against her skin, mesmerized. We are watching a broken soul fall in love with her own cage. Lorenzo leans close, whispering that green represents loyalty. Then his darkness bleeds out. He admits the stone reminds him of a dress she once wore around another man, a memory that still fuels his territorial rage. The lesson here should chill you. True danger takes root the exact moment you confuse a partner's suffocating jealousy for a genuine romantic compliment. With a single sharp nod, Lorenzo finalizes the purchase, treating her consent like dust. Then he executes a terrifying psychological pivot. Tightening his grip, he demands to see the men's bands. He declares that if she must wear his mark, he will proudly wear hers. A tragic blush floods Lily's cheeks. She looks up at him, mistaking this calculated theater for genuine emotional surrender. But in his dark world, rings are just a public branding iron. By offering his hand, Lorenzo crafts a flawless illusion of shared power. He steps inside the cage just long enough to lock the door from the inside. Let us examine this hard truth tonight. A seasoned manipulator will gladly wear a symbolic collar, so long as it convinces the victim to gratefully lock the leash around their own neck. The jeweler's hands shake as he brings out a tray of bands. Lorenzo selects a thick platinum ring, matching the cold gravity of her emerald. He slides it onto his finger with grim finality, cementing his psychological claim. For Lily, watching that metal catch the light, the ground shifts. The frantic nightmare has solidified into inescapable reality. Giovanni nervously murmurs that sizing will take 2 weeks. Lorenzo's jaw hardens. With the chilling impatience of a predator securing his catch, he ruthlessly slashes the schedule. He declares they will marry in exactly 1 month. You and I must recognize the terrible mechanics of this forced urgency. A manipulator will always accelerate the timeline, ensuring the victim has zero space to process the trap or search for an exit. 1 month. The deadline hits Lily like a physical blow. Her pupils dilate, and a frantic pulse beats against her throat. 30 days feels like a scheduled execution for her freedom. Lorenzo smells her panic instantly. His voice drops to a dark purr, threatening to drag her to Vegas tonight if she complains. His smile masks an obsessive hunger for control. She tries a fragile laugh to break the tension, but his hands cup her jaw, locking her into his gravity. He whispers that she is already his. He leans down, kissing her with a bruising intensity that forcefully short-circuits her panic. Her logic melts into overwhelming sensory overload. The underlying tragedy here is profound. Cold reason simply cannot survive when deep fear and intense desire violently collide. A shadow of predatory promise darkens Lorenzo's eyes as he offers the ultimate illusion of choice. He asks if they should go to her apartment or his sprawling estate. Exhausted and trauma-bonded, Lily chooses his place, eager to step inside his golden enclosure. As his armored car glides through the streets, he leans in close. He warns her that once she enters his domain, she will never leave. That is the exact language of a hostage taker, yet her shattered mind digests the threat as romantic poetry. She simply nods, resting her head against his shoulder. His penthouse sits atop an impregnable tower, a chilling masterclass in isolation. Take this thought with you tonight. The most dangerous, inescapable prisons are never built with cold iron bars, but with gentle promises of eternal safety. Step into the dark with me, you and I. Picture Lily stepping from the elevator, bracing for a cold, villainous lair. Instead, she finds a sanctuary of warm wood and art, a trap Lorenzo built to dismantle her final defenses. She drifts to the massive glass window, staring at the glowing city. Without a sound, he is behind her, chest pressed to her back in a silent, overwhelming claim. He points to the sweeping skyline, whispering that everything below belongs to them now. She is drowning in the delusion, pleading that she only wants him, not his wealth. His heavy hands tangle in her hair, pulling her deeper into the dark. The lesson here is painfully clear. Refusing a monster's gold does not stop you from becoming his most prized possession. The air inside the penthouse feels impossibly heavy, drowning in shadows. Lorenzo begins to weaponize his own fractured mind, whispering confessions of his dark, violent urges. He twists his brokenness so smoothly that Lily truly believes she is the only one who can save him. Show me. She breathes into the quiet room. In that exact second, her final instinct for survival quietly dies. Lorenzo does not offer a soft romance. In turn, he shifts into something feral, sweeping her into a bedroom that mirrors his own ruined soul. His heavy hands undo her dress with terrifying speed, muttering about the months he spent plotting this absolute domination. Remember this simple truth for your own life. When a broken soul pours out his darkest secrets, never mistake his toxic confession for an invitation to heal him. Her hands tremble uncontrollably as she works his shirt buttons, slowly exposing the scarred skin of the Mafia king, who now holds the deed to her soul. As her dress slips to the floor, Lorenzo watches her with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. We have all witnessed this tragic dance before. With an unnerving calm, he lays out his impossible demand. He wants to burn away her entire past until only his name echoes inside her mind. He is asking his captive to hand over the key to her own cage. She pushes his shirt away, whispering into the dark that she was always his. He answers with an icy promise to teach her the true meaning of surrender. Carry this grim reality with you tonight. The ultimate tragedy of the human heart is erasing your own identity just to feel safe in the arms of the person who is actively destroying you. The heavy shadows swallow them whole as Lorenzo systematically dismantles her last remaining defenses. He traces her skin like a ruthless conqueror claiming territory, perfectly calculating every move to extract absolute submission. Hours later, Lily drifts in that agonizing headspace where she feels like she has finally found her home, yet is simultaneously free falling from a ledge. That is the devastating gravity of a trauma bond. He strokes her skin gently now, treating her as if she were made of spun glass. Tangled in the sheets, a massive emerald ring catches the dim light, a glittering, beautiful handcuff. He asks if she harbors any regrets, and she instantly surrenders her total absolution. Keep this lesson close. True love builds a quiet, solid foundation. It will never demand that you find comfort while plunging into a deadly fall. Staring up into the quiet dark, Lily whispers that her only true regret is wasting so much time fighting to be independent. It is a heartbreaking confession, the devastating final stage of his psychological dismantling. Lorenzo slowly cups her cheek, cementing his absolute ownership over her beating heart. In a desperately sad attempt to save one fractured piece of her old self, she asks to share his last name, trying to frame it as an equal partnership. Lorenzo knows this fragile rebellion poses absolutely no threat to his iron grip. He just offers her a warm, utterly terrifying smile and agrees. She buries her face in his chest, clinging to the shattered delusion of a fair romance. Let us take away this vital lesson today. A gilded cage never magically transforms into a sanctuary, even if the warden allows you to pick the color of your own bars. Morning eventually invades the penthouse, brutally bright and unforgiving. Early sunlight slices directly through those massive glass walls. Lily wakes to the suffocating, heavy heat of Lorenzo pinning her against the mattress. For one merciful second, she is entirely disoriented until a cold rush of reality washes through her veins. She turns her head, silently watching his chest rise and fall. In sleep, his ruthless mafia armor seems to melt away, leaving the illusion of a vulnerable man. But you and I know that is a dangerous lie. She walked straight to the apex predator, and he happily locked in his eternal victim. The truth here is difficult to swallow. We often confuse the adrenaline of shared trauma with genuine affection. But falling asleep inside a tiger cage will never provide you with a safe place to call home. His dark hair lies tangled across the stark white pillows. She stares quietly at the faint bruises blooming on his skin, the physical receipts of their unhinged descent into madness. Without opening his eyes, his deep voice breaks the silence, warning her to stop staring. She tries to laugh it off, nervously joking that he is faking sleep just to spy on her. But this terrifying hypervigilance is permanently hardwired into his criminal veins. He simply yanks her flush against his chest, completely indifferent to the morning. Then her eyes dart to the clock. It is past 9. Pure panic floods her system as the reality of facing his crime syndicate crashes down. Take this vital lesson to heart. Sometimes, the absolute hardest part of choosing a dark path is stepping outside into the daylight and letting the world see who you are choosing to hold hands with. Listen closely to the way he speaks to her now. He wants his entire underworld empire to witness his absolute conquest. That polite, corporate mask he wore during their early days is dead and buried in the dirt. His heavy hand wraps around her neck, his thumb slowly tracing her jawline as if he is inspecting a newly acquired property. He whispers into her ear that her days of answering phones are permanently over. A mafia king requires a proper queen, so he casually gifts her the title of executive director. She stammers, trying to push back with frail arguments about business ethics and unearned power. Lorenzo merely smirks, radiating the terrifying arrogance of a man who believes he controls the weather. The truth of this moment is painfully simple. You can never successfully negotiate your morals with someone who already holds the master keys to your reality. Lorenzo is a dark artist of manipulation. He spins this twisted promotion until it looks like overdue justice, packaging his suffocating control as a beautiful gift. Lily is desperately clinging to the fraying threads of her morals, trying to mount a defense. She refuses to wear this fake executive power as a trophy for surrendering to his bed. But this tiny act of rebellion only makes his cold eyes spark with predatory approval. He praises her stubbornness, expertly weaponizing her good heart to drag her deeper into the mud. "You are not like the rest of them," he whispers into her skin. That is the ultimate, intoxicating poison for a shattered heart. We all desperately want to feel special, but seeking your validation from an actual monster is the absolute fastest way to forget your own face when you finally look in the mirror. He shifts his massive frame over hers, completely blocking out the warmth of the morning sun. He begins feeding her the exact words she has been secretly starving for, swearing his dark, eternal loyalty. It is a beautifully cold psychological tactic designed to snap an invisible leash around her throat. She actually dares him to prove it, blind to the fact that his actions have already forged the steel bars of her cell. He lets out a deep, rumbling laugh and calls her wonderfully greedy. When they finally walk into the syndicate headquarters at 11, the atmosphere instantly drops. Marco takes one look at that heavy diamond, sees Lorenzo possessively gripping her waist, and realizes the game is finished. Love can certainly be a beautiful shelter, but you must always beware the cozy shelter that requires a heavy steel padlock on the outside. Let us look at this piece by piece, you and I. Notice how that heavy engagement ring catches the unforgiving light of the office. For a mob boss like Lorenzo, a massive diamond has nothing to do with soft, romantic feelings. It is a blinding warning sign, staked violently into newly conquered territory. He completely shatters her professional boundaries, dragging her clean reputation directly into the bloody chaos of his mafia world. The sudden threat from a rival syndicate is not a crisis for him. It is just a fresh stage for his violent tendencies to shine. He commands the room with lethal grace, while she stands silently beside him, like a glamorous prop in his dark tragedy. This teaches us a brutal truth about life. Far too often, what we desperately glorify as a passionate romance is truly just the terrifying architecture of our own emotional cage. The air inside the boardroom drops below, freezing the exact second his empire is threatened. The gentle boyfriend routine evaporates, instantly replaced by a terrifying wall of pure, violent fury. The rival family is deliberately poking the beast, testing his borders to see if this new woman has made the king soft. Every muscle in his jaw twitches with an ugly, paranoid rage. Marco watches quietly from the shadows, knowing full well their enemies are preying. This romance has blinded the boss. Lorenzo, masking his panic behind a calm, icy voice, is really just a desperate defense mechanism, shielding his deep fear of losing control over his favorite possession. It happens to all of us. We build these towering fortresses to appear untouchable, completely ignoring the tragic reality that our absolute biggest weaknesses are already locked inside with us. Welcome to the midnight hour, listeners. Let's step right into the shadows, where Lorenzo isn't wasting a single breath. The sun hasn't even dipped below the skyline, but he's already calling a sit-down on neutral concrete. Now, you and I need to look closely at the tragic poetry of how he plays Lily here. She is weeping, begging to stay out of this bloody waterfront war, but he just paints over her terror by crowning her his true partner, by dragging her up to the velvet throne of his underworld he makes her feel seen, invincible. But the agonizing truth? He is positioning her right in the path of the bullets. True love means keeping a gentle soul out of the fire, not dragging them into the blazing flames just to watch them glow before they turn to ash. As the city sleeps, the next 8 hours become a masterclass in psychological torture. Lorenzo drowns her fragile mind in a sea of blood-stained ledgers and shady contracts. He twists the narrative entirely, painting the rival families as the monsters while playing the tragic victim. Lily sits there, shivering in the cold leather chair, realizing they are coming for her just to break him. And Lorenzo, he drinks up that raw panic like expensive wine. He pulls her close, whispering that it is just the two of them against a cruel world. He is weaponizing her fear, molding it into blind loyalty. It is a haunting reality. When the night gets dark enough, we will abandon our own morals just to seek shelter in the arms of the exact person who dragged us into the storm. Listen to the rhythm of his trap snapping shut. Lorenzo showers her with praise, making her feel like the brilliant centerpiece of his dark universe. He takes the quiet, simple days of her past and completely rewrites them into a grand, tragic origin story. As their heavy armored car tears through the rain-slicked streets for an 8 p.m. showdown, the dread in the cabin is suffocating. He purposely feeds her terror about the men waiting in the shadows, Marco with his calculated cruelty, and Vincent with his explosive rage. He builds these monsters up just so he can stand tall as her only savior. It is a bitter pill to swallow. If you lock someone in absolute darkness and feed their worst fears, they will gladly trade their freedom for any hand that reaches out, even if it belongs to the devil. Under the crushing weight of the night, Lily finally breaks. Her voice is barely a whisper when she confesses her terror of the men waiting past those doors. But Lorenzo does not offer a warm embrace. Instead, his jaw turns to stone. He becomes cold iron, swearing to destroy anyone who dares to touch his property, calling her his property. That is the quiet sound of a cage locking. He guides her into the dead silent restaurant, surrounded by killers in tailored suits, and places his heavy hand right on the small of her back. She leans into it, mistaking his possessive grip for romance. It is nothing but a velvet leash. Here is the midnight truth. Just because someone wraps their arms around you in the freezing cold, it does not mean they actually care about keeping your heart warm. We have finally reached the devil's table, and you and I need to watch this tragedy unfold. Marco Castellano fires the first bullet, his voice dripping with venom as he mocks Lily and her title as the future wife. She freezes, the air leaving her lungs, before demanding they use her real last name. It is a heartbreaking, desperate claw at a past she can never get back. Vincent follows up with a laugh that chills the bone. But Lorenzo, he does not even blink. He pulls Lily closer, forging their twisted romance into a loaded gun. He parades their bond simply to humiliate the empty marriages of his rivals. It is a cold lesson for the lonely hours. Never put your trust in a man who uses your raw, bleeding heart as a shiny distraction to win a ruthless game against the ghosts of his past. The atmosphere turns to ice the moment the waterfront territories are brought up. Lorenzo slides his thick folders across the mahogany table with the quiet, lethal grace of a predator. He lays out his legal right to the docks, proving he left sectors 4 through 7 untouched for 18 long months. He played their bloody game flawlessly. Across the table, Vincent explodes, hammering his fists and screaming about Sector 12. And right there, trapped in a room of apex predators, Lily makes her fatal move. She steps into the crossfire, fiercely defending the very man who orchestrated her ruin. It is a sorrowful reality of the human condition. Pour enough of your love into a burning house, and eventually, you will gladly walk right into the flames just to guard the ashes. Picture the scene with me right now. The entire boardroom flatlines the second Lily recites that ironclad legal clause. The smugness wipes right off Vincent's face, and he desperately spits out the word secretary like a curse. But Lorenzo owns the room now. He leans forward, his voice a low, rumbling thunder. Right in front of these seasoned killers, he renames her director, partner, future wife. Vincent physically recoils from the sheer suffocating authority. Lorenzo has taken her brilliant, beautiful mind and sharpened it into a blade for his empire. We cannot ignore this grim truth. When you solve a massive problem for a truly dangerous man, he will never let you go. You have just proven that you are far too valuable to ever see the daylight again. The air in that room is heavy enough to crush bone. Teresa tries to extinguish the flames, blaming the outburst on endless paperwork, but Marco's eyes are completely dead. This entire midnight meeting was a trap. They wanted to see if the infamous Lorenzo had gone soft for a girl, but look at his eyes. Hollow, unshaken. He executes a flawless emotional maneuver, telling the wolves that Lily is the very foundation he stands on. He wears this manufactured vulnerability like a Kevlar vest, and beside him, Lily drinks it in. A blush colors her cheeks as she surrenders entirely to the beautiful phantom of his devotion. It breaks the heart to witness, but our minds will eagerly swallow a gorgeous lie just to avoid the agonizing truth that the door locked behind us a long time ago. The heavy oak doors finally slam shut, bringing an end to the psychological bloodbath. Minutes later, the steel locks of their armored car click into place, sealing them in the pitch black. Lorenzo immediately yanks her in for a hungry kiss, gripping her like a stolen artifact. He whispers praises of her absolute ruthlessness at the table. But listeners, she is trembling. Her hands shake as she breaks down, weeping over the sheer terror that almost swallowed her. And his response? He casually wipes away a single tear, completely numb to her trauma, caring only about the flawless mask she wore for his enemies. Beware this kind of darkness. To a master manipulator, your silent suffering means nothing, as long as your performance makes them look invincible to the rest of the world. Look closely at how his fingers trace her jawline in the shadows. There is no tenderness there. It is a territorial claim. As the long weeks bleed by, Lily is forced to witness the cold brutality of his syndicate. But the human mind is a master of self-deception. She spins a tragic fairy tale to survive, convincing herself that she alone understands the weeping boy trapped inside the monster. She actually believes that his soft whispers in the dark can wash the innocent blood from his hands. It is a devastating illusion, this belief that a warm heart can thaw a frozen soul. We all learn this painful lesson eventually. Believing you possess the magic to cure a villain is the exact delusion that leaves you with nothing when they finally decide to feed you to the wolves. The scene bleeds into a chilling cathedral wedding. 150 crime lords sit in the pews, calculating bloodlines instead of tossing rice. Lily walks down the long aisle toward her own demise, carrying the very last fragment of her innocent soul into this beautiful nightmare. At the altar, she stares up at him, entirely mistaking his iron grip on her life for eternal love. The cavernous ceiling echoes as they exchange vows. When Lorenzo whispers that he will guard her until the end of days, you can hear the heavy steel doors of her reality shutting forever. You and I need to let this sink into our bones tonight. The most inescapable prisons are rarely forged from iron bars. They are meticulously constructed out of the most beautiful, intoxicating promises ever spoken. The heavy gold rings slide onto her trembling fingers, and a chilling, hollow peace washes over Lily's face. The internal war is over. She has traded the quiet safety of a normal life for the intoxicating gravity of a kingpin's bed. The priest murmurs his final blessing over the most cursed union on earth. Lorenzo pulls her in, and the kiss is a violent collision of manufactured romance and absolute dominion. It is the final nail driven into the wood. They rest their foreheads together, whispering vows of dark devotion like a blood pact signed in the shadows. The sweet girl from the coffee shop is dead, swallowed whole by the beast she loved. Here is the final lesson for the night. The most lethal traps are the ones we willingly step into, completely addicted to the beautiful danger. Step into the quiet sanctuary with me. Lily and her husband walk down the aisle, bathed in the false light of the church glass. It is a tragic lie. She knows the man beside her is a ruthless mafia boss. Yet she ignores the screaming alarms in her gut. She trades her independence for the desperate illusion that they are equals, painting her descent into his dark world as some epic romance. But listen closely. You can almost hear the invisible chains dragging behind the silk of her wedding dress. The cruelest victory for a tyrant is not building a cage. It is making the captive bird believe she rules the sky. You and I know the harsh truth here. You will never find your way out if you keep finding beautiful ways to romanticize the exact poison that is slowly stopping your heart